Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Business and Regeneration and Planning Overview Committee. Fire drill. There is no expected fire drill, so if an alarm does go off, please evacuate the building as quickly and calmly as possible. Please use the stairs, do not use the lifts. Once out of the building, please gather outside the Virgin Money building, formerly the Yorkshire Bank, on the opposite side of the road. Exit by the door in which you came through. Do not, if you need any assistance, by all means ask for it. Can you please also make sure that your mobile phones are turned off or on silent, please. This meeting is being recorded, but not for live purposes. Thank you. Do we have any apologies? Okay, thank you very much. You have before you the minutes of the previous meeting as of the 3rd of August. Can I have an approval for that, please? Thank you, Richard. Seconder? Bagwan. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest apart from what's already listed in the minutes? Councillor Connachor.
Register item 14. I have an interest because there was a data breach in March that involved my information about me. Okay.
Item 5. Public consultation. Member of the public. I believe that's yourself, Mrs. Connachor.
Item that I've asked to speak on, item 9.
We don't have Councillor Smith here, do we? No, but we do have Councillor Zul. And you're standing in his place.
I'm Business and Regeneration, but if there are any questions in relation to planning and regulation, then I will try and field whatever they may be, to the best of my knowledge, Chair.
I believe that Ash, you could help in certain instances with questions that might arise.
Yes, of course, Chair, that's fine.
Councillor Connachor.
In the forward plan, we were supposed to have a paper to Cabinet on the Abbey Street development in October, which obviously hasn't happened. Could the leader tell us if Abbey Street's progressing correctly or to schedule? And also, the last time I asked, the hotel contract was either signed or about to be signed with the construction firm, so it'd be useful to have a very brief update from the leader, if we may. Thank you.
Yes, we are on schedule with the hotel. There was a slight issue, as I understand it, with the tender to begin with, about making sure everything was signed, etc. That is now well underway. I think it may even be signed now. I haven't yet had that briefing from officers, but I have been asked for a briefing on Abbey Street on the 3rd of November, where I'll have a further update on that. But as far as we are aware, everything is going according to plan, and in the tender, the prices of any materials, etc., for the build were locked in as part of the price. So it has been future-proofed, given that there is shall we say, a volatility in the market at the moment, but that was locked in at the original tender state.
Yes, Councillor.
And in the risk registry, it talks about the resourcing for planning. And I know we've lost some planning officers, and some things are taking ridiculous long whiles. We've had an application in Wellington for the railway embankment that was never determined. So I'm just concerned if we have to do these planning applications for not the Abbey Street, but for the other things, are we actually able to staff up the planning department back to full strength? Because I know we have been weak on that. Thank you.
A slightly complicated issue, that it is a systemic problem within this authority that we don't pay the going market rate for professional roles such as planning officers, which is the subject of your question, but indeed in other places like finance, recreation, grounds maintenance, etc., which proves a problem in terms of capacity for delivering a number of projects. I cannot give a 100% guarantee that every planning application will be dealt with on time. We aim to do so, but I don't think any leader or planning portfolio holder could give a 100% guarantee. We are, as a new cabinet, looking at ways we can improve the recruitment and retention of staff, which would include the planning department. That is something which was also identified in the LGA peer review, which I believe you gave evidence to, Councillor Condacor, and they did identify that there is work to be done there, both in terms of our strategy, our marketing strategy in terms of how we advertise to people, but also in terms of the benefits package for actually working for this authority, which is actually quite good in terms of mobile working, working from home where necessary, agile working, flexible working, etc. So these are things we could sell more in terms of advertising Nuneaton and Bedworth for potential job applicants. There is a particular problem both in planning in that we are trying to review planning policies for the Borough Plan Review, for example. There are approximately, and I'm sure Ash will correct me if I'm wrong, about 15 or 16 policies which need to be reviewed in order for us to have a sound Borough Plan Review. There is a budget for that, but it does not extend to do all the reports that we need within 1 year. To do so, A, we would need additional officer capacity, which we don't have, so we have to rely more on external consultants to do that. But also, if we were to try and do everything with a click of my fingers, and believe me, I would love to do so because the Borough Plan is one of the biggest failings of the previous administration, it would cost approximately £250,000 additional spend pressure on the budget to do so. We haven't got that money. We already have £1.5 million to find in the next budget year, just to balance the books. So it is a very complicated situation. There is no simple or easy answer, but we are looking at every single way we can to improve recruitment and retention so that we can crack on with these important reviews, whether they be planning applications, planning policy, or indeed any other area like regeneration within the town. So it's something I, as leader and as the portfolio holder for regeneration and business, am very alive to. Thank you, Chair.
Why your question?
It's good to, even for the more minor planning applications, to sort of package them up, and because I say there were a few things that have just never got determined, like the application in Wellington for the embankment someone took out. So there might be a solution that involves not doing something with a big project, but actually getting rid of a lot of the minor casework to someone else or some external consultant or something, just to try and cope with the sheer workload. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, moving on. Item 7, the monitoring of the borough plan. And that is Ash will be giving a report on that. Thank you, Ash.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm not going to give a detailed presentation. The report is in front of you, so I take it that you've reviewed the report. What I would say is the authority have a statutory requirement to produce an authority monitoring report, and we have to produce that by the end of the year. So there's somewhat of a lag typically when authorities publish these. So the data for the previous financial year will be produced by the end of this year. So what's in front of you effectively relates to 2019-20. But that provides the most updated, up-to-date position in terms of what's in the public domain, and I'll happily answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Ash. Is there any questions? Yes?
This has come at the wrong time, effectively, for when we got the new data. So I would be wanted to request we have something coming back in December or whenever the actual annual monitoring report is produced, because we're being asked to look at a report, which is really good to look at the annual monitoring report, but it's like sort of looking at it before it's been done, which isn't really very useful. So if the committee doesn't mind, I wouldn't mind this coming back as an item when it comes to Cabinet or whatever around. It's usually December time, I think, the annual marching report is complete. Second thing is, we have a lot of things going on with climate change. We've got a climate change policy, which is rather weak. But one thing that was mentioned when we did it was actually monitoring progress against climate change objectives. So I don't know if the annual monitoring report that we will have in December will mention where we're going with climate change adaptation, how much biodiversity we're losing or gaining as part of developments, etc. So obviously that monitoring report it is our easiest way of ticking off how we are progressing or not progressing. And when we start moving to houses with heat pumps or district heating, it will actually monitor a lot of what we're doing in terms of progress. You know, what percentage of our houses have non-fossil fuel heating systems. So I do think it would be useful to I don't know if Ash knows if those things are in this year's report, but it will be really, really essential that the next year's annual monitoring report has some matrices so we can actually see we're actually progressing on these things as a borough. Thank you, Chair.
Answer that one, Ash, for me, please.
Thank you, Chair. So, in relation to the first point, from my perspective, that's fine. My suggestion to the Chair would be that we bring a report in the new year, because ultimately it's a factual report. So it will be published, it'll go to Cabinet in December, and then I'm more than happy to come back to this committee after that. In terms of the data, so within the report, there's an appendix which identifies the data which is monitored. So the level of detail that you're referring to, we don't capture as part of the authority monitoring report. That isn't to say, as an authority, we shouldn't be considering that. But through this process, we just monitor what was agreed at the borough plan adoption. So there's a set of indicators. So I suppose there's a couple of things there. The first one is, in terms of the plan review, what I suggest to committee members is that provides an opportunity for members to feed into that review process and consider what indicators might be necessary as part of the next plan that is being prepared. And as Councillor Wilson alluded to, there's multiple policies that will need to be considered there. So there's an opportunity there. As the second point is, I think if there's wider indicators, it might be that they are picked up through other means, and I know the authority is doing significant work in terms of the climate change plan. So it might be that perhaps there's a wider component that needs to be brought to the committee that goes beyond what I can actually sort of talk about.
Thank you very much, Ash. Yes, Councillor Conville.
Of the total net housing delivery that will be in the report. I know the report's got all the details, but has an early indication of 600 or 400 houses as the net delivery, because that would be useful to give us a guidance as to where we're going. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. So if I can request that I'll provide that information to the committee when we publish that data, which I expect will be in the next 2 weeks. I'd rather do that rather than providing a figure here tonight, because I think it's sort of fair and proper that everyone receives that at the same time.
Thank you, Ash. Is that okay for you, Councillor Conagall? Thanking you. Is there any other questions relevant to this item? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Moving on, item 8, Coventry and Warwickshire housing needs. Again, this is down to you, Ash. Thank you very much.
So again, Chair, not going into copious detail in terms of my verbal presentation, the contents within the report. Obviously, there's a slight omission in terms of the portfolio. It is planning and regulation portfolio, so that does need to be captured. As I understand it, the committee were keen to understand the position regarding housing needs across Coventry and Warwickshire. Effectively, in terms of the planning policy position at this authority, there's a position established within the adopted borough plan. As the committee are aware, that plan is now subject to review. In order to determine a sound number for any plan review. The piece of evidence that we now prepare is called a Housing Economic Development Needs Assessment. So that work is in train and it's being prepared across Coventry and Warwickshire. We await the results of that piece of work. And the report does touch on wider factors such as the ONS issue regarding Coventry, but depending on the questions, I might have to defer some of those, depending on the detail, because ultimately that is an issue for the ONS. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ash. Any questions relating to that?
It'd be good if someone else asked some questions as well. This ONS stuff is really important, and I've been involved in the population projections for this borough for about 15 years, and particularly for the last 10 years. And going right back to when the borough plan process started, it was clear that the base need in the borough is 300 or 400 houses a year. And in fact, the figure at 3.7, it would be worth if the document actually included it. I think it's something like 428 or 429 is the actual base figure on which you add 35%. So effectively, although the 35% uplift sounds dreadful, because our figures were so inflated, it actually brings us to considerably less housing than we've actually got in the current plan. I'm particularly interested in 3.8, 3.9 and 3.10 because it's an area actually I presented to the Office of Statistical Regulation, my evidence on the errors in Coventry in particular. And I'd like to point out it's actually not the student population that's miscalculated, it's actually the population between people being students and then being captured by the census in 2021. So effectively, people are counted into Coventry as students and as a migrants for economics. So the 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 21-year-old populations is more or less right for Coventry. The massive failing of the ONS is that when people leave Coventry, they weren't noticed. So if you look at the population area for Coventry, it's 20 or 30,000, but it's actually between 22-year-olds and 34-year-olds. It's that region, the population of Coventry, is really badly wrong. And you can see this in the vaccination figures. Coventry has the country's lowest vaccination figure in that age band, if you believe the population from the ONS. So the vaccinations show that actually that population between 22 and 34 is far smaller in Coventry than what the housing study is saying. And that has a knock-on and easy to see, because the birth rate in Coventry is falling massively in terms of births per adult. And that's because a lot of these people between 22 and 34 don't actually live in the city anymore. So I do hope we take this urgently, this actual error in Coventry. It is actually a very large error. You know, we're talking 20 or 30,000 potentially. And it's of those people of the age where they start to buy housing. So it's a very, very important error, because if you have an error in the older population, they're not actually generating new households. They've probably got a house. But if you miscalculate the population between 22 and 34, your whole housing study is then horrendously wrong. So I hope Ash can respond to some of these points. And I'm a bit alarmed by 3.10, where it talks about a bolt-on commissioned work to look at this error, because this error needs not to be bolted on and looked at later, but actually right at the heart of the new plan. Because if you don't get the population right, you plan for a totally wrong mix of housing, and you build on all our countryside. You do all sorts of things that are just totally unjustified based upon what the real population of Coventry and Warwickshire is. And we know the figures are wrong because of the empty houses, the number of people. Everything says this is grossly wrong. And we are, in the next 4 years, going to have to consider planning applications based upon 20,000, 30,000 population area in Coventry. Now, there is also a population area in Warwickshire, which is probably the other direction, but far smaller. So I really do ask that we expect to accelerate the population study part of this, and we actually take this error seriously, because we don't get our countryside back if we work out we didn't need to build on it. So I'd say the government needs lobbying a lot harder, because I know the controlling group quite rightly will have asked the ministers and whatever to do something about these population errors. and actually ask to freeze our plan. I don't know what the details are, but yeah, there's lobbying of government happening, and quite rightly, and I praise the Conservative group for doing this type of work. But to actually get the government to change something or to give us a moratorium till the census is out, I think, takes a lot of political pressure across party. Thank you, Chair.
Wish to speak?
So, by way of background, we do have to await the HEDNA, which Ash quite rightly said, and we have to await the statistics which come out of that. The central problem that we are facing at the moment is a total lack of engagement by the controlling Labour group in Coventry to review their own local plan, because I suspect that would then throw up a number of their own areas which they aren't willing to do. That then makes it very difficult with the duty to cooperate as currently stands in law. I know it's subject to potential reform as part of the planning bill which is due, but we have to operate within the current confines of the law. We also have the problem that as much as we are reviewing the figures now as part of the HEDNA and the Borough Plan Review, until we actually have a signed off review by the Borough Plan Inspector, whatever figures were in the original Borough Plan, which were passed by the previous administration here, we are locked into, as much as I strongly and vehemently disagree with them and have campaigned against them vociferously in my time on this authority. But what I can give an assurance both to members on all sides, although it is a shame that there is actually no Labour member here at all to scrutinise the work. It looks like they've actually given up on Nuneaton and Bedworth. At party conference, I went to a number of events and I put our case directly to both the Minister for Housing, Chris Pincher, and the new Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, I think that's the right title now, Michael Gove, and actually put Nuneaton and Bedworth's case to them to look at and said there is a clear error here and they are trying to fudge their own figures in Coventry to overinflate things, and we need some security but also fairness in the housing numbers if people are actually going to buy into planning itself. I know that is a major issue in Nuneaton and Bedworth in particular about confidence in the planning system. So the Secretary of State and the Minister have given an undertaking to me when I was there that they would investigate the issue. However, we do have to recognise it is part of a wider planning issue which is being investigated by the government at the moment. But I can assure all members who are actually present and bothered to actually be here that I continue to maintain the pressure, I continue to investigate this issue very closely, and the sooner I can get our housing numbers revised, I will do so, but I can only do so as a leader and as an authority within the confines of the legal framework, and that is what I have to do. Thank you, Chair.
If any other queries on that item, if not, we shall move on. Sorry, Councillor Condacore.
I just want a very good response about the political side, but just about this bolt-on commissioned survey at 3.10 to see whether it was actually after the other work or whether it was actually just part of it at the same time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the bolt-on piece of work, that's part of the HEDNA Commission. So when we, as the joint authorities, initially commissioned the HEDNA, it wasn't included. The ONS issue regarding Coventry came out. We had a discussion as officers and considered that that would be a useful exercise to get a third party to come in and vet effectively the demographic information. It's a small cost to us. I think it'll put us in good stead at the examination in public. So it's effectively been undertaken as part of the current commission.
Thank you, Ash. If we can then move on to, where are we? Item 9. Space left over after planning. Now, I believe this is following on from a question raised by Mrs. Condacore. If you'd like to speak at this moment, and then we can ask Ash to answer the question, please? Thank you.
I was very disappointed actually when I read the item in the agenda, because it doesn't actually raise, it isn't actually the problem that I raised in my question. I was very much not talking in general about spaces left over after planning, although obviously that is relevant too, but it was about gaps that are allowed to be between developments. And we've got the situation just off the long shoot where there are two developments, and each development has a fence round their side and things, and there is a metre gap between these two fences, and rubbish is getting dumped there and no one is taking responsibility. And I want there to be a system in place through the planning system here at the council that cannot happen in future, because it is absolutely crazy. I understand that in that particular situation they didn't want it to be a through road, and that's fine, I understand that and things, but it is absolutely mad that people have got housing literally that far separated, but with two lots of fences that they can't access, so no pedestrians can get through, no cyclists can get through, people can't access the nearest play areas, and no one is taking responsibility for cleaning out these things. So we need a system, not just about general bits of space, but that we don't end up with these bits of space, which, I mean, I called it ransom strip because I know a lot of times they have developed because someone's being greedy and thinking, oh, well, in order to get the access to the next bit of land, they'll have to pay me a load of money and things. But this isn't happening. I mean, that to me is wrong anyway, but we need somehow that the system, that if a planning application goes in, it's not just looked at, oh yes, it's within the red line of the thing, but hold on, it doesn't go right up to the edge. Why doesn't it go right up to the edge? And what is going to happen, when the next bit of land gets developed or doesn't get developed and things? You can't have these two bits of fence. And in this particular situation that I'm aware of, not only have we got two bits of fences, the land's at different heights and things. So, it's just a ridiculous situation. And the item that's in the agenda things only talks in very general terms about space left over and things. And I know the parks and countryside people are very good in their where they deal with things to try and avoid having little ridiculous bits along the edge of land and things, and we need something so we don't get this situation in future. So I think it needs to be looked at rather differently than how the item is presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. No, I recognise that the question asked initially was regarding ransom strips, and what I've tried to do for the committee is prepare an item that, in my professional opinion, the planning system can have some influence over. Now, in terms of ransom strips, my professional view is that isn't something that planning can influence. We have to be aware of ransom strips when we're looking at allocations, because they can have an issue in terms of the deliverability of a site. But the fact a ransom strip exists, that there isn't anything specifically that we can do to necessarily address that from a planning point of view. So what I've tried to articulate in the report is that when the council are preparing strategic planning documents, these are the tools that are available that can help to reduce what I would call space left over after planning. Now, I recognise that doesn't necessarily deal with this particular case in question, but ultimately they're the tools that are available to the authority in terms of strategic master planning. And I am actually of the view that the design codes or the supplementary planning documents that I've referred to are a means of reducing space left over after planning. However, they, in reality, they're not going to prevent an issue regarding a ransom strip. Ultimately, the council will receive a planning application at a point in time, and they'll have to determine that planning application that's in front of them, you know, i.e. the red line that's come to them. As long as the correct certificates have been served, then our role as the local planning authority is to go away and determine that application. Chair, I don't think there's much more I can add to that at this point. I'm happy to take any follow-up questions.
Okay, thank you, Ash. Can I raise a question then? How does it occur whereby, as Mrs Condacor stated, that two developments, I'm assuming by two different developers, effectively, and this is how I see it, do not build up against the same line, i.e. leaving a gap? Is it because on plans those lines drawn, the red lines, are not accurate to a degree whereby the builder, the developer, is happy to build on the red line?
So to some extent, Chair, it's a commercial matter, but in effect, when you've got strategic allocation, you know, and let's use the allocations to the north, because that's a good example. It's in multiple land ownership, and the promoter or developer will have options on that land. Now, when they bring it forward, in some instances, these issues arise where strips of land will exist that they can't basically come to an agreement with that particular landowner. Therefore, they'll submit something to the authority that they can work with, and ultimately our role then is to go and determine that application, is it in conformity with the development plan that exists.
That raises, from my point of view, that raises another question in terms of what Mrs Condacor has asked, and I'm sure that's not the only place. Who owns that strip of land, that metre strip of land, or whatever that it might well be?
So I'm talking in general terms, but the authority can do a land registry check to establish ownership of land, and we do that from when we're dealing, say, with planning enforcement. Obviously, we'll need to do a land registry check.
Thank you, Ash. Sorry. Councillor Condacor, did you raise your hand?
These metres of land existing, it is actually making sure if we do a planning application, we know they are there, and we don't do boundary treatments to the planning applications on either side, thinking that the fences do actually coincide, and actually just avoid if only one fence existed and there was a metre of unallocated land, if you haven't fenced it in, then naturally it's cleanable, things can go. It's the fact that almost the planning system is blind to things in this little metre. And so I don't think anyone's suggesting banning people from not selling the last metre of land, because that would be very difficult in terms of free market, but actually just making sure we don't fence in bits of a metre wide to end up having 2 6-foot fences, a metre gap, and then it eventually over time just filling with detritus, rubbish, rats, and quite often, because it's easier for the developer to do a flat site, one developer will flatten out the land to where they're building to, the other developer will flatten out half a metre lower. So not only is it a half a metre gap full of rubbish, it's a sloping half metre gap full of rubbish that will eventually landslide or whatever. So I think it's on the planning forms, and when things come to the committee, we can actually see on the drawings at the back or whatever saying the boundary and actually, yeah, with the boundary of an adjacent application.
Oh. Councillor Baxter-Swift.
Is there not something you can do, we can do as a planning authority, that would say to the developers, if there is an abandoned strip of land that you're not going to develop on, then can you look at turning it into a hedgerow or making it or planting trees, something there that stops the land from just sitting empty? And if there's rubbish on a piece of land, wouldn't the landowner then be responsible for tidying it up?
Can you answer that one, Ash?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think that was the premise of the initial question. In fairness, we can't compel a developer to do something that's outside their control. What I would say is officers, planning officers and colleagues, in parks will try and negotiate with the developer to try bring a scheme forward that has sensitive boundary treatments. So we will try to achieve that. Clearly that doesn't always happen. We have to determine the red line. In terms of tidying up land, that yes, there are powers that exist for the authority regarding untidy land. The bar is quite high to do that, and it's a very long process, but that power does exist. So and we have used that power. That's probably kind of a last resort. There are other powers that exist as well in environmental health that we can utilise.
Thank you, Ash. Phil, you wish to say something?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to clarify and come back to Councillor Baxter Payne's question, and certainly Mrs. Kandaka's question. What we're talking about here is effectively land ownership. Developers cannot build or develop on land which they don't own or don't have control over. And this is a case where a previous owner, for whatever reason, has chosen not to sell a strip of land. And I think a ransom strip is probably the best way to describe it. It is by design that this has occurred, and it may well be because they were looking to negotiate a ransom for releasing that land as part of a more comprehensive development. It's from a planning perspective, and I'm sure those of you who are on planning committee are well aware of this, the role of planning applications committee is to determine the application in front of it by reference, as Ash has said, to the red edge. So the obligation is to assess the development that's before you against the planning code and determine whether or not it satisfies the planning code. What's been suggested, I think, is, well, can't we look outside of the red edge and see whether there's bits of land that ideally really ought to be incorporated into that scheme? And certainly as the planning code is written at the moment, the answer is no. You deal with the application on its merits, and that's certainly the message that we've always given to members of Planning Applications Committee. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. If there's nothing more on that, we shall move forward. Item 10, Integrated Performance Report, first quarter. Phil, yes. Okay, thank you, Ash, for your time.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is it's actually the first quarter report, so it is April through to July of this year. So I think we're slightly out of sync in terms of where we're at, but the report itself is a fairly standard report. We have endeavoured to tailor it to the responsibilities of the panel so that it's a little bit more tailored. And you'll see from the structure of the report that obviously we give you some financial information in terms of the position on budgets, and then later on through the report you'll see that then again specific service specifications or key performance indicators, there is a table that will show you whether or not we are or how we're performing against that, and whether or not we are on target or not. I should stress, Chair, that there is a trend indicator at the end of each table, which is we use the smiley or the frowny face. I should stress that that is a trend indicator. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything in the garden is rosy and that we're on target on something, but what it will say is that compared to the previous monitoring period, whatever that might be, that we're moving in the right direction. So if you've got a smiley but it's actually performance is still below target, you will still get a smiley face on the trend indicator. That doesn't mean, though, that action isn't going to be taken to address the deficiency in the performance. It's just that things are moving in the right direction. Chair, rather than pick out specifics, I think if members have any questions, I'll endeavour to address those by reference to the report. Just to say as well, Chair, the members also have the strategic risk register attached, which I think it's the entire risk register, so it gives members an opportunity to see what those risks are and what the mitigations are for those. And again, I just wanted to stress, because it has been raised previously, in some cases, mitigating risk is very hard to do. You may have a gross risk which is red, you may still have a net risk which is still red. That is because of the way that the risk is assessed, because if you've got a high incidence of something and it's high impact and you mitigate it by 1 point, it might still be within the red zone. There is I can explain that a little bit more if members want me to, in terms of the tables that are at the front of the risk register, but I do mention that because it has been suggested that why is that red, and it's still red. And lastly, Chair, you have got the FOI information, so you've got the details in terms of the number of FOIs that we've received, whether they've been dealt with on time, whether they're late, and what's outstanding. So you've got a fair bit of information there as well, Chair. So it's really now over to the panel. If they have any questions or they want to draw anything out of this that they want more information on at a future meeting, this is the opportunity to do so.
Thank you, Phil. Has anybody got anything specific to raise regarding the report? Councillor Condacor.
The last time this came up, I mentioned the planning delays, and I asked the question, what about applications that are never determined or have not been determined so far? And I never got an answer to that, and it's particularly relevant to Weddington, where we've had a development on the waste ground for the old railway line, and the enforcement action was going to be taken, but the applicant put a planning application in, and that planning application has never been determined. And so obviously it is in this limbo land that we won't enforce it because of the pending planning application. And this indicator might or might not miss out applications that are just never determined because we haven't got the effort. I think the officer dealing with it has left the authority. But I mean, that's quite serious if we're not measuring the ones we're actually dealing worst with. And the top farm is now past 4 years. If that was in the, I don't know what 4 years is in terms of weeks, it must be about 200 weeks. I think it's supposed to be determined in 13. So it's about 190 weeks outside its deadline. So I do think we need some visibility on applications that are ridiculously late. We've got them for the freedom of information requests. If the freedom of information request is 30 days late, we've got these trees and trees worth of tables and freedom of information requests. But we don't have the planning applications that are outstanding for more than 6 months or, yes. And I think non-determined planning applications are a serious issue. So if Philip Richardson could actually answer me this time about how many are long-term overdue and if they're in the metrics, that would be very useful, Chair.
Not sure whether, are you in a position to answer that at the moment, or would you rather leave it for Ash?
I would say, Chair, that I would take that away and get an answer. I certainly can't answer the question on the embankment. I don't know quite what's happened with that. So that one would have to come back. I can say, though, Chair, I can answer the one question which Councillor Kandaka did pose, which is that they do form part of the metrics. So Top Farm, for example, is skewing our performance figures, as you'll see. And so once that is determined, the figures will improve significantly.
Thank you for that, Phil. Councillor Wilson, thank you.
The specifics about Top Farm, I think it is important to place on record that this is a particularly complex planning application. It is possibly the largest one I can remember in almost 12 years on this authority, with 1,500 houses. There are significant negotiations ongoing, particularly in relation to education, health, leisure provision, etc., all of which is taking time. Now, I accept the premise that it is a long time coming, But if we are to make sure that we get it right, and I would hope that Councillor Condacall would agree with me on this, that the north of Nuneaton, Weddington and St Nicholas in particular has been very poorly served with infrastructure and leisure, education and health provision, we need to make sure that we get this right. So I myself have had conversations with the NHS about health provision, for example, on the Top Farm site versus the Weddington Field site. So I think it's important to put that there on the public record, that whilst it may look particularly bad in terms of being out there for 4 years, and there may be capacity and other issues regarding that, but I think we also have to factor in, Chair, that it is a complicated set of things going on here. There are lots of different bodies involved to try and make sure we get that this is all pulled together correctly, because in reality, Top Farm, without wishing to prejudge my position on the planning committee, has the potential to solve a number of the ills of the cumulative developments which have occurred on the north of Nuneaton, which haven't put in place the infrastructure, both physical and social, which has been needed. So I think it's important to put that into context, Chair.
Councillor Wilson? Philip?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And if I can just pick up and follow on from that, I just think I think it's worth reminding members that there is always an applicant in these matters, and they have the choice whether to pursue an appeal against non-determination. The applicant in this case has agreed that because of the complexity of the case and because it is a major, that they would not do that. They are happy to negotiate and understand the reasons for the delays, and to some extent they have requested these delays whilst they undertake some of the work that they feel they need to do in order to bring the site forward. So it's not a case that, yes, there's a 13-week time frame for a major and we've exceeded that. It is a case that the applicant has said, we do not want you to determine this application yet because we're not ready. There's a lot of work to be done on this, so please hold on to it. So it's been done by agreement all along. So there's no question that the planning service has failed to determine this within the time frame. It is because of its complexity, as with a lot of other majors, a result of negotiation and agreement between the parties to get it right. And as Councillor Wilson has said, there is an awful lot of infrastructure, a lot of contributions that will flow from this scheme. So it is important that we do get it right.
Thank you for that, Phil. I appreciate that, and I believe that sounds to me it's a good reason for the delay factor. I hope that meets your Councillor Condacall.
Significantly longer as well, we should actually reconsult the public, because some people will have bought houses near Top Farm in those 4 years, and so much has changed. Yeah, people have 21 days to comment on a planning application. If the planning application just sits there for 4 years being redesigned, changed, whatever, the public have to be a stakeholder in this process. And I think the ridiculous length of time, and I understand the justification for it being long, but you then need to actually have an event or some way of read letters to the public so they can actually see where you finished with the 4 years. Thank you, Chair.
If nothing else, we move forward to item 11.
Chair,
Excuse me. Sorry, Councillor.
Thanks, Chair. Towar's statement there. When you buy a property, you engage solicitors to do a search. That search would pick up the planning application straight away without a doubt. And if it didn't pick it up for whatever reason, your legal representative is at fault. So to re-engage with the public and doing the public review, there's no need. People who move there, trust me, they know it's coming. So there you go. Thanks, Chair.
If there's nothing else, we'll move forward to item 11, the forward plan. Indeed. Please.
Yes, Chair. We always put the forward plan on for overview and scrutiny panels to see. It is an opportunity to do some pre-scrutiny work if the panel is so minded. So you will see there's a number of items on there which are key decisions. There is the opportunity to request a report on any of those items. Obviously, just picking up Councillor Kandaka's point about Abbey Street, and obviously Councillor Wilson has mentioned this, but obviously that is moving forward, so it's likely that that one will be before Cabinet, before this panel gets a chance to even consider the issue. But of course then you could do some post-scrutiny work if that's the case, if that's the will of the panel. So there is a number of things there which are or may be of interest to the panel that they may want to have a report on. So the report that the forward plan is there really to just give you the heads up on it, and to really to ask you the question, is there anything here that you as a panel would like to look at?
So it basically gives our opportunity to, as you say, raise an issue regarding to be brought forward to the next OSP. Yes, Councillor Condacor.
To decide if we want to talk about something in future, it would be useful if Philip could actually just tell us a little bit about the local government devolution, if that's just something that's on there and not being taken forward, and also the refresh of corporate identity. I remember when British Airways changed their tail fins, and there's lots of... I wasn't sure if anyone could just brief sentence or two what that was about. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Wilson.
I can answer both of those points. In relation to local government devolution, I have agreed with the Chief Executive to keep it on there in the event that something does change. So there are no particular plans at the moment, but if circumstances do change, so if a white paper comes out, for example, that's due any time now, allegedly, then we have the ability to react a bit more quicker than having to go through some of the urgent processes that we would have to do on that. In relation to corporate identity, it is something that was picked up from the sector, the town centre and businesses meetings that I had by different sectors between July and August. One of the things which came forward from all of them, almost to a sector actually, was the fact that they found it difficult to actually buy into Nuneaton and Bedworth because there was a lack of identity and a lack of marketing. So one of the things that I'm particularly keen on is that we actually try and forge an identity that we can go out there and sell Nuneaton and Bedworth on, particularly if we're going to be going out there to try and get Regeneration partners involved in transforming Nuneaton and Bedworth. And there are a number of things which we need to improve on as a council. So, for example, there are at least 4 different websites as a council that we are involved in, but there is no commonality between them, nothing which actually links them, apart from a little logo somewhere as being Nuneaton and Bedworth. Different departments are doing different designs of documents and reports and policies, but have no common theme. We need to, in my view, coming in, get more professional as an authority, and my discussions with officers have been very positive about this. It may involve a logo refresh because it hasn't been done since the 1980s, possibly before that, and it's about actually going out there and marketing Nuneaton and Bedworth and saying, here we are, come and invest, come and take notice of us, and there is no anticipated additional cost. It's something that we can phase in. So once we actually get to the point of consultation, Councillor, you'll be able to see more of what's going on, and that is built into the timeline that there will be public consultation on this. But is there something we can identify as being particularly Nuneaton and Bedworth that we can sell? Rugby has the rugby ball, Warwick has the castle, Stratford has Shakespeare, and it's what do we have as Nuneaton and Bedworth that people can hook onto? So this isn't just rebranding for rebranding's sake. This is actually trying to make us a much more forward-looking professional authority that people have confidence in moving forwards. And I would hope that all members would actually buy into that. Changing a logo can be done on a screen these days without having to reprint thousands and thousands of letterheads. You can just do it on your printer as you go along. Changing a logo on a, if it is a logo that we end up doing, on a website doesn't take that much effort. The livery on cars and whatever we have can continue, because it will still say Nuneaton and Bedworth. You just, when you replace it, you just update it. So that is what is going on behind there. That will also tie in a lot with the corporate plan refresh. So there are a number of strategies which are sitting side by side there on the forward plan, which we are moving forwards on together.
We actually have a bit of pre-review on it if someone could present us the early ideas or something at an appropriate time when they're worked up enough to this committee. 'Cause I think it is an important part of regeneration. It is the sort of image. Thank you, Chair.
One of the things I have said to Dawn Dawson, I think it's now Tom who's leading on this from memory, that when it comes particularly to the corporate plan, for example, which will tie a lot of the themes together, I want that to come to scrutiny, because I actually do value scrutiny when it comes to having sat on it for a long time. We're looking at going out to consultation and twin tracking it so we can put it out to consultation and bring it to scrutiny. And I have said that as leader, I am more than happy to come to a scrutiny panel and present it and go through it in some detail, whether that be all three panels separately or whether we look at, for ease of coordinating everyone, subject to your agreement as panel chairs, obviously, Chair, and there's another panel chair here, whether we look at a one-off combined joint overview and scrutiny panel of all three panels to look at this. So I'm very much trying to be as inclusive as possible in this, but we do need to make sure we have a refreshed corporate plan with the new administration's priorities and updating it in light of recent events and things moving forwards, Chair.
That we bring it to a joint OSP meeting at a time when you're in a position to offer a solution. I'm sure Councillor Baxter Payne is in agreement with that, rather than have it as a single agenda item. If we could make a note of that, and as and when you're ready.
Of course, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Okay, if there's any item on the forward plan there that required to be brought forward to an OSP to be put on the agenda, please let us know. Not necessarily at this moment in time, but if you would forward me an email. Thank you. And then we move on to item, where are we? Item 12, yes. We have our draft work plan, page 120. So our next meeting is December, which we have the annual report of activities scheduled in town centre development and regeneration. Is that correct? So we have the three items.
Yes, Chair.
Okay. Is there any other questions or any other items? Councillor Condacor.
Another TPO removal application, and I think trees are getting higher and higher up the agenda for planning and various issues, and obviously various residents now have trees that are far too big for the size of their gardens, and we do have lots of planning issues over trees, biodiversity, and we don't seem to yet have much in the way of a strategy for, in particular with COP coming up, talking about millions and millions of trees being planted. I think planning for these trees needs to be in one of the three scrutiny committees. I think a lot of it will come through the planning system. So I didn't know where we put this as a work item, but I think if there's money for trees going around and we're losing trees for all sorts of reasons as roads are widened, etc., somewhere in the council we need to be part of that, asking for money for more trees, getting trees in as a planning thing. And also we keep doing wildflower meadows when we get developers come in and they say we're taking all this biodiversity out, we'll plant some wildflower meadows, and eventually you run out of space that's suitable for wildflower meadows. So I would like to reforest this borough quite a bit, and I'd like to have trees and forestry from the planning point of view, either on this or the environment scrutiny as a work item. Because I think with climate change, it is that box saying offsetting. Thank you, Chair.
Please, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you to scrutiny and be as accountable as possible. Councillor Gutteridge is doing a piece of work on trees. As I think I mentioned to you before, Councillor Condecourt at Cabinet, that one of the things we have found since taking control is that there is a lack of policy overall, particularly in the grounds maintenance and recreation, parks, etc. And trees policy is something which is being worked upon, but it comes back to that thing I mentioned earlier about officer capacity. So I know it is something that Councillor Gutteridge is looking at and is very keen on these things. And he is especially keen on the wildflower meadow idea, because we have had, as you have rightly said, a number of planning applications where Section 106 contributions have been paid over for wildflowers, which haven't actually been done. Councillor Gutteridge, as part of the 106 monies review that he is doing, is looking at where we can spend that and the particular conditions that have been attached, because some have to be just within the borough, some within a certain radius, that's the word I'm looking for, of the planning application. So I don't see any reason why it can't be scrutinised, but I have a feeling it probably sits more under Councillor Baxter Payne's remit than it does this one. No objection to it being looked at, Chair, but I know it is being looked at. The relevant portfolio holder sits under Councillor Baxter Payne's jurisdiction, so I think it probably sits there.
Thank you. Condecourt.
There is quite a planning element to it as well, so I hope that we can get involved in that as well, even if it sits with the other OSP.
Any other items? All good? Thank you very much for your attendance. I'll close the meeting. Thank you.